Hi all, this is a student expression module for the school law class. So when it comes to student expression, we really first have to start with the history of student expression. And so prior to 1969, students really did not have free expression rights in schools. School officials were given just absolutely total control for what students could or could not say in the course of the school day. All right, that all changed in 1969 for the first time in the case of Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District. All right, and in that case, the Supreme Court created the disruption standard. It was at that moment in history, 1969, when students were given the broadest school student expression rights that they've ever had. Since 1969, the Supreme Court has been consistently narrowing the scope of student expression rights. So you saw in Bethel in 1986 that lewd, vulgar, and plainly offensive language could be regulated. In 1988, they provided further clarification that anything that it sort of bears the stamp of the school's approval, such as a yearbook, that all, or a student newspaper, school-sponsored expression, that could be regulated at a much higher level. And then in 2007, most recently, any speech that promotes illegal activities, such as drug use, also has no protection under the First Amendment to the Constitution. Okay, and that's what we're talking about here. First Amendment, the free expression clause applying to all citizens, including students in the United States. But how far that extends for students is what has been debated over all these years. So these three cases form the real basis of student expression law still today. And it's called the Trilogy. And in particular, the first two cases are vital. All right, so Tinker and Frazier, that is the core of student expression law for most of the cases that are going to come up in the course of your careers. So Tinker, that really sets a substantial disruption standard, okay? So student speech is protected under the First Amendment as long as it is not creating a disruption in the school environment. All right, so we're constantly asking the question of, is this a real disruption or is this just a perceived disruption? How broad of a disruption was this in this particular instance? Those are the questions that we really fight out in court under the Tinker standard. Fine, when you then turn to Frazier, which really helped to narrow the Tinker standard into only expression that is not lewd, vulgar, or plainly offensive. Anything lewd, vulgar, or plainly offensive, the Supreme Court came out and said that the First Amendment does not apply to that, and school officials have total authority to regulate. All right, that really forms the core of student expression rights even still today. Then we have a sort of a side issue around the school-sponsored speech. So anything that is the school website, the school newspaper, the school yearbooks, the flyers that go home, any of that kind of stuff that sort of bears the stamp of the school's approval, school has much more authority to regulate. There, all they need is a legitimate pedagogical concern. There doesn't have to be a disruption, and it could affect even speech that is not lewd or vulgar if they have a pedagogical concern in order to regulate. Okay, and in the example there, that student newspaper case in Hazelwood, they were writing about issues around sexuality in the newspaper, asking about teen pregnancy and preventing, different ways to prevent pregnancy. The school said, hey, that's something that comes up in sex ed class. Therefore, that's our pedagogical interest in regulating the students from talking about this issue at all. All right, that forms the core. That leads into this test. If you this is the human flowchart that either you have participated in already or you will participate in. That really, it's through these series of questions that you can find the end point on any given student expression case, whether that be cases that pop up in your career or whether that be on an exam. This is the core of what you should be asking. So implications of this are all over the place, right? So we have lots of different ways that we try to regulate attire related to student expression rights. So attire that has specific sayings on it, we run through the test. Bandanas, different types of hair coloring, all that we run through the test, right? And so all that test is really at the core of all questions. So you can just ask any question on expression related to attire or hair color or anything, and boom, let's run it through that student expression test. Oh, there's our hair color one. And then we've seen lots of political students trying to make political statements. Sometimes that gets regulated, sometimes not. If it causes a disruption, which some of these cases around the president making political statements about the president have done, then yes, we can regulate. Last point we want to make around student expression is around off-campus speech. So the internet, of course, has really changed the game of student expression, because now we're seeing way more student expression than we've ever really seen before. So that translates into school officials trying to regulate more speech than they have in the past. The question that we have to ask, and if this is something that comes up, someone makes a Facebook comment about you as a teacher or something, the question is there a nexus with the school environment between this speech at home and what's going on in the school? If you can't say that these two things are substantially related and that one is causing the disruption in the other, the activities at home are causing the disruption at school, if you can't make that pretty direct connection, then the school really has no authority to regulate that speech outside of the school basis. That speech can be regulated through the police, regulated through lawsuits between private individuals. There are other ways to regulate that speech, but not the school, okay? And certainly not you as teachers trying to regulate that speech. So that's student expression in a nutshell. Again, historically, we've been narrowing over the course of the last 40 years. But that's still a better position than we were prior to 1969, where kids had absolutely no rights at all in public schools.